At being 108, getting to know her son Gary and hearing all the things about her life and people that have known her, I reached the conclusion through what I hear from others that she was a virtuous woman, just like Ruth. We're talking about a life that's a recipe worth remembering. And in this recipe has nothing to do with ingredients that we would think of. Recipe has everything to do with characteristics of a life that's godly, that's worthy of follower of a Christ. You know, a couple of years ago, I was given an apron for Christmas. I don't know if it was a joke or someone really didn't know who I was, but having an apron on and wearing a hairnet doesn't make me an Iron Chef. It doesn't make me a sous chef. It doesn't make me someone that can make a great recipe at all. In fact, I can wear it, I can look the part, I could dress the part, and I could try making the best peanut butter jelly sandwich there is. But that's as far as I can go. You know, looking and dressing doesn't make who you are. As we look at with Ruth and thinking about Ruth and what she demonstrates to us and the life that she lived, I find very interesting as we think about it. She was a Moabite. She wasn't an Israelite. There was nothing about her that was Jewish. Not in her blood, not in her name, not in her location, not in what how she spoke. There was nothing about her that would shine that here is this great Israelite woman. But she was a Moabite, but she didn't pretend to be an Israelite. She didn't try to blend in and compromise and put on a mask, if you will. But she was who she was, and there's no hiding that. But what carried her was her kindness and goodness to her mother-in-law, Naomi. And the people started picking up the longer that they were there of her goodness of going out into the fields and getting what was left over and bringing that to provide not only for herself but to her mother-in-law and the sacrifice of her, choosing. She could have gone back home to her homeland to what was familiar and what was comfortable to her, but to choose to leave and to be with her mother-in-law, well, that's a sign of a virtuous woman. And that's what Boaz saw. Boaz was close of kin, and he is not the closest one, as we'll find, but he was in line to where he could be the kinsman redeemer. And that's a beautiful phrase that stands out in the book of Ruth. The Hebrew word is goel. And if you want to get more background to that, I would recommend Deuteronomy chapter 25 and Leviticus chapter 25 and understanding what goel is. To give you an idea, if someone of Israel, God's people, would prematurely pass away and there was no heir, then there was in the law of God that the close of kin, a kinsman redeemer, can go and to marry that widow and to provide an heir for in honor of the one who's passed away. And there were other stipulations. If you were poor and you had to give your land up and sell yourself into servitude, a wealthy benefactor could come and buy back and redeem your situation. It's beautiful because we need to understand this in relationship to the story of Ruth, because it's a great foreshadowing of our Redeemer. See, God established it at the very beginning of how He redeemed the Israelites when they were slaves, and all they knew was Egyptian life and Egyptian talk. They looked like Egyptians, they smelled like Egyptians, they talked like, and they had no identity of themselves. And He redeemed them by bringing them out of Egypt and into identity of who God wanted them to be. Our third ingredient Again, we're looking at a recipe, a quality of life that's godly. We've talked about determination that Ruth shows us. We looked at consideration. Under whose wings, God's wings, that you're under for refuge. Today I want us to think about one's reputation. It's there as was read for us in verse 11. I will do all that you request, for all the people in my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Ruth, it doesn't matter that you're a foreigner. It doesn't matter that you're an immigrant. It doesn't matter that you're from Moab. It doesn't matter that you're a maidservant, that you're a widow, that you're out there, trying to make ends meet, pick up what's left over by the farmers and so forth. That it doesn't matter these things. What stands out to me, what attracts me to you is your character and how virtuous you are. Reputation is something that's valuable, something that you can't say for yourself. But how you live your life day in and day out and what people see and what they know. Jesus would say reputation in this way with the metaphor of light and salt in Matthew chapter 5. We find later in the New Testament that your character is in such a way that those who oppose you have nothing to say that would stick because of your integrity, because of your character. Ruth shows us that even though this foreigner, even though this Moabite, and what we're following the story of God's people, that we see the importance of redemption, we see the importance of character and being virtuous. All this plays out in the time of Judges when people did what was right in their own eyes because there was no king, and chaos and calamity and rebellion and sinfulness. There's this beautiful story. God providing us and showing us, to me, a foreshadowing of what would soon transpire through Jesus Christ. The first point I want to share with you is this. Ruth prepared to meet Boaz. If you look in the first 3 verses of Ruth chapter 3, we find that what sets out that as Ruth would approach in a very submissive way at this evening where Boaz slept there, threshing the floor there, the threshing floor, that Ruth listened to her mother-in-law Naomi. When she came back and told of the great dialogue that she had with Boaz, and who Boaz was understanding who she was in her identity, it was Naomi that realized that Ruth could not just try to pick off what's left over and just scavenge the land, and that's just the way life is going to be with us, because Naomi could not provide any more sons to Ruth. There's nothing more that she could offer, but this close relative of Boaz was a possibility. And so in this process, we see that Naomi instructs Ruth to prepare herself to meet Boaz. If you look with me in verse 5, actually verse 3 leading to verse 5, she says, therefore to Ruth, therefore wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. Notice verse 5. And she said to her, all that you say, I do. Reminds me of in a wedding feast in Canaan where Jesus performs the very first sign. The mother of Jesus is there in that feast, and the servants are scrambling because they're running out of wine, and it was going to be very much an embarrassment to the family, to everyone involved. And the mother of Jesus says to the servants, whatever he tells you to do, do it. You do it. Ruth, what's a quality of a virtuous woman? You do what is asked. Ruth as a foreigner. She did not object. She did not say, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't feel like this is what I should be doing. I don't want to take part in this, Naomi. I respect you for who you are, but we have a good thing going. And Boaz is showing kindness and allowing us to go and not only just pick what's left over, but allowing us to go and pick the cream of the crop. Let's just stay with that. No, she didn't do that. She didn't object. She didn't try to add her few thoughts to it. She did what was asked of her. She would wash, she would anoint herself. What we're seeing here is this picture of her preparing herself very much like a bride being presented to the groom for marriage. So keep your finger there and you'll look over to 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 1. Paul writes, therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all unfilthiness, and all the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. As we, as Christians, continue our relationship with God, we need to understand the importance of spiritual cleansing. Having nothing in our life that is filthiness. Why? Because we serve an holy God. A God that is holy, a God in whom we should fear and revere and not compromise. Not compromise in what He has said and what He expects of us. What was asked of Ruth is asked of us as God's people. And are we to carry the light and being salt of the earth, that we cannot go both sides. We cannot live as the world lives and expect to come on Sunday and be what God expects us to do. It doesn't work that way. God knows better. He knows better than that behavior. You've got to cleanse yourself. And that starts inside of us. And it works its way out. We cannot be a part of anything that what God deems as filthy. Why? Because God is holy. And as God is holy, He wants us to be holy. As was asked of Ruth, we need to consider the same. If you continue looking at this beautiful story, we see that Ruth submits to Boaz. In verses 6 through 9, Ruth began to understand the importance of the Israelites as she understood the family dynamics with Elimelech and why Naomi felt so bitter about God had turned her favor against her. But then it changed when Boaz had saw Ruth, and it got his attention. She then saw that God's favor had turned back to them. She understood the importance of an heir, the importance of the promise, the importance of continuation of family line. She understood that Naomi could not bear any more children. She understood that her sister-in-law Orpah had gone back to Moab, to what was familiar, and it rested with Ruth. It was up to Ruth. She had the guidelines of her mother-in-law, but really it came down to Ruth doing what was expected. It was harvest time. It was a time of feasting. Boaz, after eating and drinking, he went back to the threshing floor to lie down, exactly where she would know where he would lie down. And while he was asleep, Ruth crept in to him and lay down at his feet. As a place of submission and as a place of humility. Why didn't Ruth wait for Boaz to propose to her? Because, as Boaz informed Ruth, he was surprised at what she was doing. He knew what was taking place. He wasn't born yesterday. As she had anointed herself, washed herself, prepared herself, and laying down there in submission, he knew that there were younger people, younger than Boaz, that Ruth could have sought out a relationship with those people, whether they were rich, whether they were poor. But Boaz also knew that there was someone closer kin than he was, that by law had the right to decide whether or not he wanted to take Ruth as his wife. He understood that. So there was a lot in play here, and it wasn't as easy as like, okay, this person likes me, so I'm going to like this person. You know, there was some stipulations, and there was the law of God and provisions that the God had provided. But look what is said here by Ruth in verse 9. He said, "Who are you?" She said, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." You are a close relative as one to take me in to redeem not only me, but to redeem my mother-in-law Naomi, to fight to bring us back. And you have the ability to do that, is what I've been told, but they didn't know there was someone closer. Boaz knew that. Take me under your wing. If you go back and look in chapter 2 and verse 12, it was, "The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given to you, under whose wings you have come for refuge." You are brought here, it wasn't by chance, it wasn't by sheer luck, it was by, there's something bigger that's taking place. It's God being involved here. You're under God's wing now, being in Bethlehem, not in Moab. But here is Ruth in chapter 3 asking, "Can I be under your wing, Boaz? Your shelter, your provision, your care." Boaz understood the desire or the request that Ruth was asking. But isn't Ruth in a lot of ways stepping out in a big way in demonstrating faith? To take what Naomi said again, it just has to play in her mind always. I am not one of you. I am not an Israelite. I am not of you're God's people. Even though I made this vow to you, it doesn't just mean that. And we study the Old Testament, we just think, well, God's just the God of Israel. God's just the God of the Hebrews, and that's it. That's not true. God is the God of the whole world. And there's redemption involved, and we find this in the life of this woman, yet she's trying to understand her place and trying to do her best and trying to listen to her mother-in-law, but yet understanding the ways and practices of the Israelites. Again, it's not like she understood all these things and was brought up this way. Even though she was married, the marriage was in Moab. It wasn't in Bethlehem. But to present herself in that way with complete humility and to listen to her mother-in-law shows to me tremendous faith in this woman. Tremendous faith. Well, Boaz could have said no. He could have said, "Why are you here?" He could have said, "Get out." He could have said any of these things. He was waiting, and she was really going, presenting herself. The rest depended upon Boaz. So her faith and leaning and really trusting in the advice that she was getting and following through with that shows a lot. Are we submissive to God's will? To not fully understanding what may happen or what will be, but just trusting that God will provide and God will bless us, and leaning upon Him. Let me tell you something, folks. You know this. You're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to know why everything is happening, and you're not going to have just a clear path that's just shining in front of you that this is the way I need to go. There are going to be times in our life where we don't know what to do. But we do know what we should be doing in those times we don't know what to do, and that is we need to be trusting in God. That's where faith is demonstrated the most. At the crossroads of life where we are challenged by whatever life presents to us, and things that we're at a point in our life that we know others who have lived on past us, but it's our first time being at this point in my life, and it's all new. I don't know what to do. But we trust God. We've got to be submissive to God, and to submit to His will. We are the bride of Christ as the church. It is His body that we are a part of, and it is His will that must be done. The last point for your consideration is this. Ruth listened to Boaz. Boaz responded well by accepting Ruth, but could have rejected her, but he didn't. He tells her she's someone worth winning for because of her reputation, because she is known to be a virtuous woman by all the people in my town. It's not really your town, Ruth, because you're a foreigner. But my town recognizes how virtuous you are. Man, that's powerful. They know how your kindness. They know about your actions and what you demonstrate. They've seen these things. She was a woman of worth regardless of being from Moab and regardless of being someone that's a maidservant and a widow and all these things that you can consider, that her character stood out above all these things. Boaz is making a promise to her. I will do for you what you request. Man, beautiful love story as we see this unfold. There was another man that was a closer kin, a closer relative that could redeem the situation, but Boaz was going to really try to work a little bit to where he could be the one, since he had the means to do that. To redeem, to show redemption to a woman that is from another place, that is not of Hebrew lineage, to redeem her into the family of God. To show what God has done for us, how God has redeemed us through Jesus Christ. But what Boaz does is he understands that there is, that what the law had stipulated, he can't just skip ahead of someone because he has feelings for her. That's not how it works. The law specified the one closest kin has the ability to redeem. And he knew there was someone else in the town of Bethlehem that did. Even though that there was some interaction with Ruth, and he was willing to fulfill this request, there was still the law, and you had to obey the law. And that's exactly what God has done for us. Jesus, when he came to earth, there was no loopholes with the law. He didn't bend it, he didn't stall it, he didn't say, well, this applies to creation, but it doesn't apply to me as God. He didn't do that. When Jesus came, he played by earth's rules. He lived the life that we live. He was born, he developed, matured. He fulfilled the law completely, wholly, celebrating the feast, doing all the things the law required. He did by fulfilling it. Why did he do that? Why would Jesus invest 33 years to do that? Why would he come and live life by its rules and its suffering and horrible conditions? Why would God do these things when he could do anything that he wanted to and say that's right and it would be right? Why would he do that? He did it because he wanted to redeem us, to buy us back. Buy us back from what? Where were we? We were lost. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. What does sin do? It makes you fall short of God's glory. It separates you from God. We couldn't redeem ourselves. There's none of us who are perfect. There's no one that can live the law fully. Even Peter would say much later that in the council that the law was something that was a yoke that our forefathers were unable to bear. We could not bear it, but Jesus did. And He redeemed us. If you'll look with me in Ephesians, in closing, chapter 1. In verse 7. Paul says this in this great sentence. It's a huge sentence in the Greek language. But he says in this middle of the sentence, he says, in Him, that's Christ, we have redemption. He is our kinsman. He is our kinsman redeemer. We have redemption. How? Through His blood. Through His blood. The story of Ruth, that it would not take blood, the purchase of blood, to redeem that situation. The story of Abraham and Isaac, even though Isaac, and it says this in Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, Isaac was Abraham's only begotten son. The same phrase we see in John 3, verse 16. Even though that God requested for him to sacrifice his son, God stopped. Abraham didn't have to go through. In these stories, they're all pointing to much later to the cross, where there was no stopping the knife, where there's no simply the exchanging of money. It was the life of Christ. It cost God everything to redeem us, buy us back from sin. Through His blood, Paul says that we have forgiveness of sins according to the riches of His grace. If we study and look at the Scriptures and see the process of forgiveness, when we've done something wrong and we know it's wrong and we have gone against God, if we could just think back of what it cost to redeem us. We always think about an event, and yes, it was this amazing event of His death. But God lived 33 years on this world. He fulfilled the law every day to get to the point to where He could redeem us by His blood, so that we could have forgiveness of sins. He is our only kinsman redeemer. There is no one else that can redeem us. He chose us. That's the beauty of forgiveness. That's the beauty of Christ and what He did for us on that day. That horrible day, but yet that day where God's grace was shown, and the richness of His grace, because we can be forgiven. Forgiven completely. Because of the life and death of our kinsman. There may be someone here this morning who hasn't obeyed Jesus Christ. The blood of Jesus Christ is there and still there to cleanse us from the filthiness in our lives, so that we can be holy as God is holy. For someone who hasn't, we've taken for granted forgiveness. We've taken for granted of God's grace. We've taken for granted our life as Christ. We find ourselves in trespassing. We find ourselves in sinful living. We've forgotten what God has done for us. We've forgotten 33 years commitment for our salvation. In fact, more than that, the prophecies of Isaiah and Hosea and hundreds of years. In fact, you go back to the very beginning, when the first people had sinned against God, and God's punishment and consequences, and the foreshadowing of the Son that would come to redeem us all. The power of redemption. still available to us all as the Lord's invitation to accept Jesus Christ, to ask for forgiveness of sins if it is something that we need to do. We are here to help you. Together we all stand. Nine.
You are the words